Democrats have plans that Grim Reaper Mitch McConnell won't be able to block. Washington U. Facing the prospect of grinding Republican roadblocks in Congress, Democrats running for president are emphasizing plans to govern with executive action if they win the White House. On topics ranging from climate to gun control to immigration, candidates are looking at ways to go around Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, R. Kentucky. Democrats know they face a shaky path to a Senate majority in 2020, and their approach reflects concern from voters and activists that a president could end up hobbled without a plan to deal with McConnell, who has promised to be for any progressive legislation that passes the Democratic-controlled House. If
raindrop, drop top, smoking, no cooking the hot pot, cracking, fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park, pot.